France once printed so much money that servants became millionaires, nobles went bankrupt, and the government accidentally invented the modern financial system. Before crashing it so hard, the nation refused to trust banks for almost a century. This is not science fiction. This actually happened. And the man responsible built what may be the first central bank Ponzi scheme in history. In 1716, France was technically one of the richest kingdoms in Europe, yet the government was broke, the people were exhausted, and the economy was frozen by fear of debt. Gold and silver had vanished into hoards. Taxes crushed the poor while aristocrats avoided them entirely. The treasury could barely pay soldiers. And into this disaster walked a tall, charming Scottish gambler with a radical idea that would briefly turn France into the most prosperous nation on earth, and then nearly destroy it. His name was John Law, and what he built would later be remembered as the Mississippi Scheme, the original central bank Ponzi. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The world you live in today is still wrestling with the ghost of John Law. Central banking, government debt, speculative bubbles, currency confidence, financial manias, political interference, and even the fear of inflation itself all echoed the same experiment France ran 3 centuries ago. If you want to understand modern money, sovereign debt, and why governments are terrified of losing control of public trust, you need to understand how one man convinced an entire nation that paper could replace gold and that dreams could replace discipline. Today, we are uncovering the rise and collapse of John Law's Mississippi Scheme, how it worked, why people believed in it, who got rich, who was ruined, and why the lessons still haunt every financial system on the planet. Let me take you to France, after the death of Louis XIV. The Sun King had ruled for over 70 years and left behind glittering palaces, endless wars, and a mountain of debt so large it threatened the survival of the monarchy. According to historians like Niall Ferguson and Glyn Davies, the French government owed more than 2 billion livres, an impossible sum for an economy still running on metal coins and tax farming. Law's banknotes were stable, easier to use than heavy metal, and accepted for taxes. Commerce revived almost overnight. Confidence surged. Law became a financial celebrity. But Law was only warming up. In 1717, he acquired control of the Mississippi Company, officially called the Company of the West, which held monopoly rights over French trade in Louisiana, a vast territory along the Mississippi River. The land was largely unmapped and undeveloped, but Law marketed it as an empire of infinite wealth. Gold, silver, furs, tobacco, sugar. The New World promised everything. Europe believed it lacked. Here is where the machine truly began. The Law proposed something breathtaking. The government would swap its crushing sovereign debt for shares in the Mississippi Company. Bondholders could exchange unreliable government IOUs for stock in a company that supposedly controlled the future wealth of an entire continent. The state reduced its debt. Investors gained hope. Law gained influence. Then in 1718, the Banque Generale became the Banque Royale, the Royal Bank of France. The Law now controlled the printing of money, and he used that power to fuel the scheme. A new paper was issued too by government debt. More shares were sold, more paper printed. Stock prices rose, wealth appeared everywhere. By 1719, Paris was intoxicated. The price of Mississippi shares exploded from 500 livres to over 10,000. Street vendors became millionaires. Aristocrats begged for stock allocations. Even shoeshine boys speculated. As David Graeber later wrote in Debt, the first 5,000 years, Money had transformed from a tool of exchange into an engine of collective belief. The city around the Rue Quincampoix became the beating heart of global speculation. Carriages clogged the streets. Fortunes were made before lunch and lost before dinner. Nobles sold estates to buy shares. Servants quit to become traders. France experienced its first true stock market mania, yet the physical Mississippi colony remained almost empty. No gold flowed, no silver, no sugar empires. The wealth existed almost entirely on paper. Law understood the danger, but believed growth would eventually catch up. He tightened share sales, merged companies, and restricted coin withdrawals to protect his bank. Every action increased suspicion. Then the psychology turned. The bubble burst with such violence that the word millionaire became an insult for a generation. Families were ruined. Trust in paper money evaporated. France would avoid central banking for nearly a century afterward. And yet, here is the most important part. John Law was not a simple con man. His system worked brilliantly at first. He stabilized France, revived trade, and solved a debt crisis no one else could touch. What destroyed it was not merely fraud or fantasy, but the fragile psychology of money itself. If you're finding this exploration of early financial power eye-opening, hit that subscribe button now to never miss out on more hidden truths about money and power, because what happened next would shape modern finance in ways most people never realize. Because the Mississippi scheme did not die in Paris. It was reborn in London, New York, and eventually across the entire world. The machinery of speculation, central banking, sovereign debt, and monetary confidence became the operating system of global civilization. Every major boom and crash since carries the fingerprints of John Law. But the deeper lesson is this: money is not metal, it is trust. And when trust is stretched faster than reality can support it, entire nations can rise and fall on nothing more than belief. The shockwaves of the Mississippi collapse spread far beyond France. Across the Channel, British investors watched the chaos with horror and recognition, because at the same time, London was inflating its own dream called the South Sea Bubble. Two nations, two schemes, one shared illusion. Both believed that paper wealth, government promises, and distant empires could outrun reality forever. They were wrong. What John Law had unleashed was not a French failure, but the birth of modern financial psychology. France learned the lesson brutally. The government defaulted on obligations. Credit markets froze. For decades afterward, the mere word bank triggered suspicion. When the French Revolution erupted in 1789, the state again turned to paper money, the assignats, and again overprinted them until inflation destroyed them. The ghost of John Law still hovered over every printing press. Yet historians like Niall Ferguson argue that Law's core insight was sound. Expanding money and credit can unlock growth. The danger lies in political interference, overconfidence, and the seduction of easy wealth. Modern central banks now operate with elaborate safeguards, interest rate tools, and regulatory systems designed to prevent exactly what destroyed the Mississippi scheme. And still the cycles continue. Consider the dot-com bubble of the 1990s. Vast fortunes created from companies with no profits, no products, no clear business models, only stories. Or the 2008 financial crisis, where mortgage debt was repackaged, multiplied, and sold until the system could no longer sustain its own leverage. Or the more recent era of extreme quantitative easing, where trillions of new currency units are created digitally, not to build empires on the Mississippi, but to stabilize sovereign debt, financial markets, and fragile confidence. Each time, the same question returns. How much belief can money hold before it breaks? John Law believed growth would rescue his system, Many modern policymakers believe the same. But history warns that growth is not a guarantee. Confidence is fragile. Once broken, it is almost impossible to restore. Yet the Mississippi Scheme also reveals something hopeful. The system lifted millions of French citizens from stagnation. Trade expanded, employment surged, infrastructure developed. For a brief moment, France experienced the kind of economic acceleration that modern societies take for granted. Law glimpsed the future. He simply arrived too early and pushed too fast. What makes his story so powerful is that it exposes the moral tension inside every financial system. Credit is both the engine of civilization and the seed of its crises. Without it, economies suffocate. With too much of it, they combust. And this brings us to the present. Governments today carry sovereign debt on a scale that would have terrified 18th century Europe. Central banks manage currencies untethered from metal, constrained only by law, politics, and psychology. Inflation fears, asset bubbles, and financial inequality dominate global debates. None of this is new. John Law walked this path 300 years ago. The uncomfortable reality is that money is no longer anchored to anything physical. It floats on promises, confidence, and institutional trust. When people believe the system is fair and stable, the machine hums. When they doubt it, everything shakes. John Law's final years were tragic. He died in obscurity, wandering Europe, trying and failing to repeat his experiment in other countries. But his legacy became the foundation of modern finance. Every central bank, every national debt market, every currency regime owes something to the lessons he revealed. So what can we take from this? First, speculation is not a modern invention. It is woven into human behavior. When wealth appears easy, discipline disappears. Second, central banking is a powerful tool, but a dangerous one. It can stabilize nations or destabilize civilizations. Third, money is never just economics. It's politics, psychology, culture, and power bound together. Finally, the Mississippi Scheme reminds us that financial systems do not collapse from mathematics alone. They collapse when confidence breaks. Today, as inflation rises, as debt climbs, as asset prices soar beyond fundamentals, the shadow of John Law returns once more. The same questions echo across centuries. How much is too much? How fast is too fast? How far can belief stretch before reality intervenes? The answers are never simple, but the story of the Mississippi Scheme offers a compass. It shows us both the promise and peril of monetary innovation. It warns that every miracle of finance carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. When people ask whether modern systems are safer, the honest answer is yes and no. We have better tools, deeper knowledge, and stronger institutions. But we are still human. We still chase riches. We still fear loss. We still trust stories more than statistics. That is why studying John Law is not just history. It is survival training for the modern financial world. If there is one lesson to carry forward, it is this. Money does not collapse because it is imaginary. It collapses because people stop believing the story that holds it together. And that story, fragile and powerful, is being rewritten every day. As we move deeper into an era of digital currencies, algorithmic trading, sovereign debt expansion, and global financial tension, the Mississippi Scheme becomes more relevant, not less. It stands as the original warning flare of modern finance, lighting the sky 3 centuries before we arrived. In our next episode, we will explore another forgotten financial revolution, one that reshaped empires, collapsed monarchies, and quietly built the foundations of the world you inhabit today. Until then, remember this. Every price you see, every bill you hold, every number on your screen is part of a story that began long before you were born. Understanding that story may be the most powerful investment you ever make.